Welcome to Daily Life in the Past. Here, we explore how ordinary people lived before modern technology and comfort shaped everyday life. If you enjoy learning about the past, feel free to leave a comment and let us know where you are watching from. And if you would like to support the channel, a like or subscription is always appreciated. For most of human history, keeping food safe was not mainly about keeping it cold. It was about controlling time. People learned how fast different foods spoiled, what conditions made spoilage slow down, and what methods could keep food usable through nights, seasons, and winters. Before electric refrigerators became common in the 1900s, families, farms, ships, markets, and towns used a set of practical systems. These systems combined careful planning, special buildings, and preservation methods that changed the food itself. To understand food storage before refrigeration, it helps to begin with a basic idea. Food spoils because living organisms and chemical reactions break it down. Microbes like bacteria, yeasts, and molds grow quickly when they have warmth, moisture, oxygen, and a food source. Enzymes in foods also keep working after harvest or slaughter, slowly changing texture and flavor. Insects and rodents add another risk. Traditional storage methods worked by changing one or more of these conditions, lowering temperature, removing moisture, increasing salt or acid, limiting oxygen, adding smoke compounds, or encouraging good microbes to outcompete harmful ones. Across many societies, people did not rely on a single method. They used layers of protection. A household might keep some foods cool in the cellar, preserve some by drying, store some in salt, ferment vegetables in crocks, and plan meals so that the most perishable items were eaten first. First, planning, the hidden system behind everything. Before modern cold storage, planning was as important as technique. A successful household or community had to answer questions like these: what foods are available right now, and how long will they last? What can be kept for months, and what must be eaten within days? How much labor can be spent on preserving, and when? What containers and storage spaces are available? How can food be protected from pests, moisture, and heat? Seasonal thinking guided most decisions. In many climates, there was a harvest rush in late summer and fall. That was the main time to preserve fruit, vegetables, and grains. In colder regions, winter supported another kind of storage, natural cold and ice. In warmer regions, storage focused more on drying, salting, fermenting, and using shade and airflow. Food storage was also tied to daily life. Many people bought or gathered food more often than modern households do, because long storage was not always possible. Urban families might shop daily or several times a week. Rural families might slaughter animals in cool weather and preserve the meat for months. As people learned to match their cooking to what could be kept safely, cooling without electric refrigeration, using the environment. Even without machines, people could cool food by using the earth, water, night air, and stored ice. Cooling does not have to mean freezing. Even a modest drop in temperature slows microbial growth. Cellars, basements, and underground pits. One of the most widespread systems was simply storing food underground. Soil temperatures a few feet down change slowly and tend to stay cooler than summer air and warmer than winter air. That stability made underground spaces useful in many regions. Cellars and pits were used for foods that could handle cool, damp conditions. Root vegetables like carrots, turnips, beets, and potatoes, apples in some cases, and sometimes barrels of salted foods. Underground storage also protected food from sunlight and temperature swings. Some places used simple pits lined with straw or wood. Others built stone or brick cellars. Wealthier households and institutions sometimes built larger storage rooms designed for airflow and stable temperatures. Root cellars and the idea of living storage. A root cellar is more than a cool room. It is a controlled environment that balances temperature, humidity, and ventilation. Many vegetables store best when they stay cool and slightly humid, so they do not dry out. But too much dampness can encourage mold. Traditional root cellars were often arranged so that different foods could be stored in different corners or containers. Common practices included keeping produce off the floor on shelves or slatted racks, storing roots in bins, sand, or sawdust to reduce drying and bruising, separating foods that give off strong odors, keeping some fruits apart from vegetables because some fruits release gases that speed ripening, ventilating to prevent stale, moldy air. This was a form of low-tech climate control. People learned by experience, and methods varied by local climate. Springs, wells, and cool water. Cold water can be a natural refrigerator. In some areas, households use springs or cool streams to chill containers of milk, butter, or drinks. The idea was not to soak food directly, but to place sealed containers in the coldest available water. Water temperatures in springs can stay fairly steady year-round. This method had limits. It depended on clean water, safe containers, and access to a cold source. But in many rural settings it helped extend the usability of dairy for a short time. Night air and ventilation. In many dry regions, night temperatures dropped sharply. People used this daily cycle. Food could be cooled at night and protected during the day. Airflow mattered. Breezes help remove heat and moisture from surfaces. Ventilation was also used in storage buildings for grains and for drying foods. A well-ventilated place could keep items from becoming musty or moldy. Evaporative cooling. Evaporative cooling works when water evaporates and takes heat from its surroundings. This is strongest in dry climates. Traditional systems included porous clay pots that sweat water through their walls. As the water evaporates on the outside, the inside cools. Evaporative cooling can lower temperature enough to slow spoilage, especially for short-term storage. It does not match a modern refrigerator, and it works poorly in humid weather, but it was a useful tool in certain regions. Ice and snow as a storage system. In colder climates, people harvested ice and stored it for warm months. Long before electric refrigerators, many societies used ice pits, snow cellars, and later built ice houses. Ice was insulation plus careful packing. The goal was to slow melting. An ice house was often a well-built structure with thick walls, drainage, and insulation materials such as straw or sawdust. Ice blocks were stacked, separated by insulating layers, and stored in a shaded place. Meltwater had to drain away because standing water makes ice melt faster. Ice was not only for wealthy households. In the 1800s, in places like the United States, natural ice became a major industry. Ice was cut from frozen lakes and rivers, stored, shipped, and delivered to homes. Many households used an icebox, an insulated cabinet designed to hold a block of ice. The ice cooled a compartment for food. This system required regular ice deliveries and careful cleaning, but it allowed short-term cold storage for milk, meat, and leftovers. Still, it is important to keep perspective. For much of the world and for much of history, cold storage was limited. It helped, but it did not solve the main challenge. That is why methods that changed the food were so important. Changing the food preservation methods that extend storage. Traditional preservation is mostly about controlling moisture, acidity, salt, oxygen, and microbes. The main methods can be grouped into drying, salting, smoking, fermentation, pickling, sugaring, and fat sealing. Each method had a best use depending on the food and the local environment. Drying, removing water to stop spoilage. Drying is one of the oldest and most widespread methods. Microbes need water to grow. By drying food, people made it much harder for bacteria and molds to multiply. Drying could be done in sunlight, in warm air, over low heat, or in special drying houses. Climate mattered. In dry, sunny regions, drying could be fast and reliable. In humid regions, drying was harder and often needed smoke or heat to prevent mold. Common dried foods included fruits, apples, apricots, figs, dates, raisins, vegetables, peppers, herbs, some greens, meat, jerky, and similar products, fish, dried fish, and fish strips. Grains, fully dried grains, store far longer than damp grain. Drying was also used as a first step before other methods. Partially drying meat before smoking, for example, improves safety and storage. Salting and brining, controlling water through salt. Salt preservation works by pulling water out of food and out of microbial cells. With less available water, microbes struggle to grow. Salting could be done as dry salt curing or by soaking food in brine. Salted foods were common on ships, in armies, and in households. Salted meat and fish could last for long periods, especially when kept cool and dry. However, salting changes the food. It makes meat firmer, saltier, and often requires soaking before cooking. Salting systems required a reliable supply of salt. Containers like barrels, crocks, or bins. Knowledge of how much salt was needed and how to keep the food covered. In many places, salting supported long-distance trade. Fish could be salted near the coast and shipped inland. Meat could be salted after slaughter in cool seasons. Smoking, drying, plus protective chemicals. Smoking is often misunderstood as mainly a flavor method. In traditional food systems, smoke was also a preservation tool. Smoke carries compounds that slow microbial growth and reduce oxidation. Smoking also dries the surface of food and can create a protective outer layer. There are different styles. Cold smoking uses lower temperatures and more time. It dries and adds smoke compounds without fully cooking the food. Hot smoking uses higher temperatures and cooks the food while smoking. In many societies, smokehouses were built specifically for this work. Smokehouses had to control airflow, heat, and smoke density. Too much heat could spoil the texture or render fat in a way that caused rancidity. Too little smoke could fail to protect the food. Smoked foods included fish, especially in coastal and river regions, meat such as pork and sausages, cheeses in some traditions. Often, smoking was combined with salting. Salted and smoked foods kept longer than either method alone. Fermentation, using helpful microbes to create a safer food. Fermentation is one of the most important systems in pre-refrigeration food storage. Instead of trying to kill all microbes, fermentation encourages certain microbes to dominate. These microbes produce acids, alcohol, or other compounds that make the food less friendly to harmful organisms. Fermentation also solves a timing problem. Fresh milk, for example, spoils quickly. But if milk is fermented into yogurt or turned into cheese, it can be kept longer. Cabbage can become sauerkraut. Cucumbers can become fermented pickles. Grains can become beer or sourdough. Key fermentation ideas include creating the right conditions, the right salt level, temperature, and oxygen exposure. Using containers that support the process, such as crocks, barrels, or skins. Sometimes using a starter culture from a previous batch. Fermented foods were not only stored food, they were also a way to make nutrients more available, reduce waste, and make safe use of foods that would otherwise spoil. Pickling, preserving with acid, often vinegar. Pickling is closely related to fermentation, but it often means preserving food in an acidic liquid, such as vinegar. High acidity makes it hard for many harmful microbes to survive. Pickled foods offered several advantages. They could preserve vegetables beyond the harvest season. They could add variety and flavor during winter. They could use containers like jars, crops, or barrels. In practice, Pickling systems depended on having vinegar or another acid source, plus salt and spices. Pickling also required attention to keeping the food submerged so that exposed surfaces did not mold. Sugaring, preserving by binding water. Sugar can preserve food in a way similar to salt. High sugar concentrations reduce the water available to microbes. This is why jams, jellies, fruit preserves and candied fruits can keep for long periods. However, sugar was not equally available everywhere. In some regions and periods, it was expensive and used mainly by the wealthy. Where sugar was widely available, it became a major preservation tool. Honey also has natural preservative properties and has been used for long-term storage of some foods. Fat sealing and confit, blocking air and moisture. Another traditional system is storing food under a layer of fat or oil. When cooked meat is packed in a container and covered completely with rendered fat, air is kept out and moisture movement is reduced. This can slow spoilage. A well-known example is confit, where meat is salted, slowly cooked in its own fat, and then stored under that fat. Similar ideas exist in other traditions, sealing with oil, storing pastes under oil, or covering cooked foods to reduce contact with air. This method still requires cool storage and careful preparation. It is not a perfect barrier against all risks, but it helped extend storage in certain settings. Grain storage, the backbone of many societies. When people think about food storage, they often picture meat and milk. But for many historical societies, the most important stored food was grain. Grain is dense in calories, it can be dried to a stable state, and it can be stored for months or years if protected. Storing grain was also a political and economic system. Taxes, armies, and city life often depended on stable grain reserves. Dryness and protection from pests. The key to grain storage is dryness. Grain harvested too wet can heat up, mold, or sprout. Many communities developed careful drying steps before storage. Once dry, grain still faced threats, insects and mites, rodents, moisture entering from rain or humid air, mold growth if moisture rises. Storage structures were designed to reduce these risks. Granaries were sometimes raised off the ground, with barriers to discourage rodents. Some used thick walls to limit temperature swings and moisture changes. Some used sealed containers like clay jars for smaller quantities. Turning grain and ventilation. In many systems, grain was periodically moved or turned to prevent hot spots and to check for pests. Ventilation helped keep moisture from building up. Because grain could be stored, it formed the basis for planning. Fresh foods came and went with seasons, but grain could keep communities alive through winter, drought, or travel. Dairy before refrigeration, turning milk into stable foods. Milk is highly perishable. Without refrigeration, keeping milk sweet for long was difficult. That is why many dairy cultures develop systems that convert milk into longer-lasting products. Short-term cooling and daily use. In households with animals, milk was often used quickly. Cooling milk in water or in a cool cellar could slow souring for a limited time, but not for long. Fermented dairy, fermenting milk into yogurt, kefir, or other cultured products, extends storage and changes the food into something more stable. The acidity created by fermentation helps protect it. Cheese. Cheese is a major preservation system. By separating curds and whey, adding salt, controlling moisture, and aging under specific conditions, people could store nutrients from milk in a concentrated form. Different cheeses had different storage lives. Fresh cheeses last a short time. Hard, aged cheeses can last much longer, especially when kept cool and dry. Butter and clarified butter. Butter reduces the water content compared to milk, but it can still spoil. Salting butter improves storage. In some traditions, Butter was clarified to remove water and milk solids, creating a product that keeps longer. Meat before refrigeration, timing, temperature, and preservation. Meat storage before refrigeration depended heavily on timing and temperature. In many places, large animal slaughter was planned for cooler months, when lower temperatures reduced spoilage during processing. Fresh meat, fast use, and controlled conditions. Fresh meat was usually eaten quickly. Even in cities, butchers and markets relied on frequent delivery and fast turnover. In warm weather, risks increased, so diets and purchasing habits often changed. Curing, salting, and smoking. Preserving meat commonly involved dry salting or brining. Air drying in suitable climates. Smoking. Turning meat into sausages, which could be cured and dried. These were not only household methods. They were also commercial and military systems. Preserved meat fed ships, armies, and labor forces. Fat and rendered products. Rendering fat into stable forms, storing lard, and using fat as a protective seal were also part of the system. Some meat products were stored under fat in cool places. Fish and coastal systems, preserving a fragile food. Fish spoils very quickly. That is why fishing communities often developed rapid preservation systems. Drying and salting fish. Drying fish in wind and sun, or salting it in barrels, allowed fish to be stored and traded. In many regions, salted fish became an important commodity because it could travel inland. Smoking fish. Smoking helped preserve fish and added a protective surface. In cooler climates, smoked fish could keep for longer, especially when combined with drying. Fermented fish products. Some cultures developed fermented fish sauces and pastes. These were ways to preserve protein and add flavor, often using salt to control the process. Fruits and vegetables, storing fresh, storing preserved. Fruits and vegetables can be stored fresh for a while, but many require preservation for long-term use. Fresh storage. The limits. Some produce stores well. If kept cool and protected, apples can store for months under the right conditions. Onions and garlic store well in dry air. Winter squash can store for months if kept dry and protected. Cabbage can hold for a time in cool storage. But many fruits and vegetables spoil quickly. That is why drying, pickling, and fermentation became so important. Fermented vegetables. Fermenting cabbage, cucumbers, and other vegetables in salted brine created stable foods for winter. Fermentation also made use of large containers like crocks and barrels, which were common storage tools. Pickled vegetables. Pickling in vinegar provided another path, especially where vinegar production was common. Dried fruits and vegetables. Drying turned seasonal abundance into a winter resource. Dried apples, dried berries, and dried herbs were widely used. Storage spaces and containers. The physical technology. Food preservation depended on containers as much as recipes. A container controls air, moisture, pests, and cleanliness. Common storage materials included clay and ceramic, crocks, jars, amphorae in some historical settings. Wood, barrels, tubs, boxes. Glass, later periods used glass jars more widely. Metal, tins, and later cans. Textiles, sacks for grains and dried goods. Different materials solved different problems. Wood barrels were strong and could be moved. Clay could be sealed and kept cool. Glass allowed inspection of contents but required careful handling. Storage areas were also designed with practical rules. Keep stored food off damp floors. Separate strong-smelling foods. Protect from rodents with raised platforms, tight lids, and barriers. Control dampness with ventilation. Keep preserved foods shaded from heat and sun. These rules may sound simple, but they represent a system built from experience. Community and trade systems, storage beyond the household. Food storage was not only a family issue. Many societies built community-level storage, granaries, and state storage. Large granaries allowed cities and states to store taxes in grain and manage shortages. This supported armies and helped stabilize food supply after poor harvests. Markets and regular supply. In many towns, daily markets were part of the system. If households could not store meat or milk safely for long, they depended on regular market supply. That created a rhythm of commerce. Ice trade and urban cold storage in the 1800s. In parts of the world with cold winters, the ice trade added a new layer of cold storage. Ice houses, delivery systems, and ice boxes gave households a way to keep food cold for short periods. This did not replace older preservation methods, but it reduced the need to salt or dry some foods and made certain diets more practical. Limits and risks. Why these systems required skill. Traditional storage was effective, but it was not risk-free. People managed several ongoing dangers. Temperature swings could spoil stored foods. Moisture could cause mold. Poor sanitation could contaminate containers. Pests could destroy stores. Inadequate salt, acid, or drying could allow dangerous microbes. Because of these risks, many societies developed strong food rules, seasonal slaughter times, standard curing practices, and careful attention to smells, textures, and visible signs of spoilage. These were practical safety checks, even before modern germ theory. How these methods shaped diets and daily life. Food storage systems shaped what people ate and when. Seasonal variety. Fresh produce was more seasonal. Winter diets in many regions relied more on stored grains, dried foods, fermented vegetables, salted meats, and preserved fruits. Flavor profiles. Many traditional flavors come from preservation, cured meats, smoked fish, pickled vegetables, aged cheeses, fermented sauces. These were not only tastes people preferred, they were parts of a storage system. Labor cycles preservation required work, harvesting, cleaning, salting, smoking, drying, fermenting, turning, checking, repairing containers. Much of that labor happened at specific times of year. Space and architecture. Homes and farms were often designed with storage in mind. Cellars, pantries, smokehouses, dairies, springhouses, granaries, and ice houses. The transition toward modern refrigeration. By the late 1800s and early 1900s, mechanical refrigeration began to reshape food storage. Before that, many households in some regions used ice boxes supplied by harvested ice. Over time, electric refrigerators became more common, changing the balance between preserving food and storing it fresh. But even after refrigeration spread, older systems did not disappear overnight. Drying, pickling, fermenting, and curing continued because they remained useful, affordable, and culturally important. Conclusion: a system built from constraints and knowledge. Food storage before refrigeration was a practical science built from observation. People learned how heat, moisture, salt, acid, smoke, and time affected food. They built structures that used the Earth's steady temperatures. They organized community storage for grains and relied on markets for fresh foods. They developed preservation methods that changed food into forms that could survive months of storage. These systems did not depend on a single invention. They depended on planning, routine, and the ability to match each food to the method that suited it best. In that way, pre-refrigeration food storage was not one technique. It was an entire set of connected solutions that allowed societies to survive across seasons, distances, and climates.